can you hear me? I have to sit on a stool so I can be taller and the microphone can be closer. Okay, so before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and thank the following people: Frank Silva, MPC's online instructional design and accessibility specialist; Mimi Sheridan, a local historian who helped me with the storyboard; and Mary Pendley, who provided me with primary and secondary sources from the Mayo Hayes O'Donnell Library. And then last but not least, the California Room at the Monterey Public Library, whose search produced 44 results on Larkin, and those who helped navigate the technology in this podium. It takes a village to raise a child, and it took a village to get me here. When I was teaching, we had one computer in the classroom, and we had a computer lab in the library once a week. But I did have a third grader who was my consultant. And anytime he helped me, he goes, "Don't worry, Miss Alota, I got this." So I'm channeling him saying, "I've got this." Okay, so we'll start. Thomas Larkin was born in Charleston, Massachusetts in 1802. Let me see what I can do here. Whoops, not that. What happened? Sorry. Screen share, but it says your screen is paused. Okay, what? Resume share. Okay, so there we are. Okay, I'm learning. So he was born in Charleston, Massachusetts in 1802. He was the son of Anne Rogers and Thomas Larkin, and grandson of Deacon John Larkin, who provided the horse to Paul Revere's famous ride. Now, his mother was widowed 3 times. The first husband was named Cooper, and the third husband was named Richardson. It would be his half-brother, John Rogers Cooper, who would be instrumental in determining his future in Monterey. Okay. As far as his early education, he had some formal education, but was unpolished when it came to grammar and spelling. He was an avid reader and a prolific writer. His works is published in 10 volumes called the Larkin Papers. When he did official documents and correspondences, he did not hesitate to get assistance for editing. Okay. All right, so he kept a journal, and it titled My Itinerary, 1821 to 1826. It was 44 pages in print, and it told a great deal about his views, his opinions, and what he thought about the times. His writing was a product of the Romantic age, and one of the motifs of Romanticism was to travel in the deliberate search for the strange and exotic. He did travel also in search for employment and landed in Boston. His first occupation was an apprentice bookbinder, but he was shortly disillusioned with that, as if he jumped from the pan into the coals. That was his quote. So from Boston, he traveled to South Carolina. And from there, he wrote, "I left home at an early age, went to strange lands and among stranger people." So he did learn, he gained experience in business and personal relations. In his journal, it was mentioned that he did use cigars and drank wine, and occasional card games played. And he enjoyed the company of women. He would meet them in the theaters, the parties, dinners, weddings. He even mentioned a friend in his journal of escorting an actress home, but did not mention his name. During that time, thespians were considered not good reputation. So it was close to slumming, as he says. So during this time here in the South, he did experience a disastrous, he did experience a disastrous partnership with a dishonest merchant. And from that, he wrote, I left home. Oh, no, not that one. Okay. All are gone, blasted, withered forever. All I have done is undone, accumulated, gone to the winds. So he left the area, poor and destitute, but then he received, his family and relatives received a letter from John Rogers Cooper, his half-brother who was already established in Monterey. Cooper then was a wealthy rancher, merchant, and married into a prominent family of Mariano Vallejo. Mariano Vallejo was a district governor of California, well-respected, okay? And so the success and enterprise of his half-brother convinced him of his destiny of wealth. So he decided to go out west. And in September 1831, Larkin left for Boston on the ship Newcastle. Excuse me for going back and forth here because sometimes the power print is too small. Okay. So on his thinking of Monterey and marriage, he said, if I chose to marry there, I should do it, providing I had any, say little, love for the lady, and the lady had enough for me. A little of the former and much of the latter, I'm a married man. So there on the Newcastle, there were only 2 passengers in this long voyage of 7 months. Rachel Holmes was a married woman on her way to meet her husband, Captain Holmes, a Danish sea captain. At this time, it's believed that they have been romantically involved during this voyage. When they came to Monterey and stayed for a period of time, Rachel started to show. So to avoid the scandal there, she left for Santa Barbara and stayed with John Rogers Cooper's friends and waited for the dreaded meeting with Captain Holmes. But news came, he died at sea on a return voyage to Monterey. And soon after, Larkin went to Santa Barbara and they married on the Volunteer in 1833. But 12 years and 10 children later, they found out that the marriage was invalid. And so they remarried again in Santa Barbara in 1845. Now, I bring Isabel in because, and Alice Larkin Tolman. Alice Larkin Tolman was the granddaughter of Larkin, and she was alive back in the 1960s. And she heard about a rumor that there was a child born out of wedlock. So she had this investigated and confirmed through research and also papers, birth certificates and all. And she insisted then to the next author or the writer of history that, well, first she said, it must have been a very long voyage in those days. And I suppose there was little else to do. She was resigned to that fact, but she did insist that any further new additions be written with her included, and perhaps I believe a phrase to say that Thomas Larkin was believed to be the first American baby born in Monterey. And okay, early years. So no. What's going on here? Sorry. Did I lose? Let's see. Consular career. No, that's not it. Okay. So, okay, sorry. His early years, when they spent their early years in Monterey, they did opened a general store, and this general store was inside the Larkin house. It was the first floor, and the top floor was the living quarters. At that time, they had a variety of goods and items because Mexico opened up trade, whereas Spain before did not. So they were getting foreign goods, good merchandise. Monterey being the capital, the ships had to sail in. It was the first port of entry. So goods had a big markup. And the second half of the 1836 experienced an economic boom. Most ranchers had credit accounts entered in his ledgers, and he had a steady clientele of various customers besides the American and English, the French, the Irish, the Danish, the Swedish, the Italian, the Portuguese, the Chilean, and Greek were all involved in this business. Because of his financial activity, coupled with a favorable attitude and hospitality, that helped grow his business and good reputation. Now, this incident in 1842 may have set the stage for his appointment as U.S. Consul to Mexico, appointed in 1844 by President Tyler. It was an incident where Commander Catesby Jones was the head of the Pacific Naval Fleet, and his ship was anchored in Peru, and he heard that the news that war had started already. So he rushed to Monterey, demanded surrender from the governor Alvarado, and had his troop take down the Mexican flag and raise the American flag. And he thought his mission was accomplished. Well, the next morning, Larkin brings newspapers to him and said, look, there is no war. So upon advisement, he went back and apologized to the governor, had his troop take down the American flag, raise the Mexican flag, and then, that evening, there was a sort of a feast and celebration at the custom house. However, he lost his commission, but he did regain it during the real war. When Larkin was appointed consul to Mexico, this were his primary duties, and it was to advance American commercial interests, protect the interests of American seamen, and protect the rights of Americans living in the area. But there were other extensive duties to the settlers. He gave information about passports. He even gave advice to those with marital problems and urged the dying to write their wills and notify their closest kin in the East Coast. He did send reports to the State Department on commercial conditions, and he reported on political conditions in Mexican politics in California. These political and economic reports went beyond his normal consular duty, which won the praise of the State Department as early as 1844, which then led to another appointment as a confidential agent. And this time, President Polk gave him that assignment. Times were troubling in 1846. One of those troubling times was with Fremont. In January 1846, he and his expedition was armed, and they claimed to be surveyors and actually double-crossed Larkin about that. He was supposed to, by the Mexican government demand, he was just to gather supplies in Monterey and then leave the area. But instead, he barricaded himself and his troops in Gavilan Peak. Larkin later persuaded him to withdraw, but his action did not end there. He went north and joined forces with the Bear Flag Revolt. Now, the Bear Flag Revolt was actually an insurrection because it was done by a group of settlers up in Sonoma. And a month later, actually, President Polk had asked Congress to declare war on Mexico. So it was moot by the time it was a republic. Larkin at this time had been sending messages of peaceful annexation, but again, everything sort of went by the basket because of the decisions made in Washington. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later about this diplomat that did some things there. and actions on the Texaco-Mexico border, settling the Rio Grande, and of course, the rashness of Captain John C. Fremont. The Mexico City meeting was too late, and this is the one that involves a diplomat who went ahead and did the treaty without and having it signed in Mexico rather than having it done with the president in mind. But on July 7th, a month after the Bear Flag Revolt in 1846, Commodore Sloat came with 3 ships, occupied Monterey, and raised the American flag over the Custom House. Okay. Meanwhile, not so peaceful in Southern California. Big state then, I mean, territory, province. Revolts in Los Angeles, occupation forces under Archibald Gillespie and his men driven out, and General Castro returned. Larkin moved his family to Yerba Buena, now known as San Francisco, as Californians throughout the province were attempting to repel the spread out California battalion, garrison troops, and Navy forces. Larkin was captured outside the city when, against advice, he tried to go to his deathly ill daughter, still in Monterey. He was forced to ride to Santa Barbara, later imprisoned in Los Angeles, and was not reunited with his family until after the signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga, which ended 4 months of skirmishes in that place. His daughter died while he was a captive. He was imprisoned for 2 months, but he was kindly treated. There was no ill will against him, but being such a prominent man, they thought he would be useful in exchange or favorable terms should it come to that. I have these, I think anyway, I'm going to go back for a minute if you don't mind, because there's a sketch. Oh, shoot. I'll see what happens. There. This sketch right here I brought up because this was done by a gunner, William Meyer. He sketched this as a tongue-in-cheek rendition of what happened with Commander Catesby Jones. He even added a musical score to the order that he gave to the troops. And the reason I went back now, this is one of the largest engagement of the war. General Kearney and his desert-weary dragoons clashed with the cavalry led by Andre Pico at San Pascual, December 1846. This is done by the same artist, his name right here, Myers. And it shows you, a rendition of the war. Then the next sketch is also done by the same gunner, William Meyer. This time, he was under Commander Jones, but this time he's now with Commander Sloat at the return to Monterey when the flags were hoisted up and the ships were at anchor. Okay. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but it doesn't come out too well in my PowerPoint. North America in 1846 was occupied by 3 powers. It would be United States, Great Britain, and Mexico. And Texas was admitted as the 28th state, but Mexico did not recognize that. And the division of the Oregon country was done peacefully between Great Britain and United States. Then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo brought an end to the Mexican-American War, completing the expansion and manifest destiny that President Polk's policy. This is where I bring in, there's no slide to this, but this is a diplomat who was sent to Mexico City to negotiate the treaty, and he was promptly fired on his return to Washington. His name was Nicholas Triss, and he began peace talks with the 3 Mexican negotiators. Polk wanted the talks to take place in Washington, and he sent orders to Mexico that Triss was recalled as a treaty negotiator. During the 6 weeks it took for Polk's orders to make their way to Triss, the diplomat realized he had a brief period to negotiate a treaty. Tris ignored the recall order and negotiated terms that allowed the United States to buy California north of the Baja Peninsula, as well as what amounted to half of Mexico's territory for $15 million. On February 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in Mexico without President Polk's knowledge. Tris sent a copy of the treaty by the fastest means possible, and the president was outraged, not only at Tris's insubordination, but the treaty didn't even cede more of Mexico's property to the United States. Polk wanted Baja California and property to the flag's east part of the deal and had communicated that desire to Tris before negotiations began. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. But nevertheless, and where was I? Okay, he was outraged. He wanted more territory, but then he presented this to the Senate for confirmation anyway. He accepted the treaty the way it was treaty as Tris had negotiated. And so when he did return, he was promptly fired and denied any salary payments earned during the negotiations. I just found out that this morning, actually. That's why I had to read it off. Okay. So this is just an interesting comparison of two cities that Larkin lived in. Monterey in 1848 was the largest city, largest settlement, you might say, the capital still, and the major commercial center. And Yerba Buena, San Francisco in 1847 was slightly smaller. But by 1849, San Francisco claimed the primacy and the capital moved also. Monterey no longer the capital. By 1849, it became San Jose, followed by Vallejo, Sacramento, Benicia, San Francisco, and finally what we have, Sacramento. So there's been 6 cities that have been serving as capital city for California. As far as the gold rush, I had to also quote the alcalde or the mayor of Monterey when the news of the gold rush reached the town. And he wrote here, "This little scratch upon the earth to make a backwoods mill race touched the cerebral nerve that quickened humanity and sent a thrill throughout the system. It tingled the ear, and at the finger ends, it buzzed about the brain and tickled the stomach. It warmed the blood and swelled the heart. New fires were kindled on hearthstones, new castles built in the air." It sounded like an out-of-body experience, and I think it filtered through some people in Monterey because we lost some builders, famous builders, that rushed to the gold rush. For one, Gallant Dickinson was responsible for California's first brick house. He took off a year after he built the brick house. David White, also left after he built his home and is now known as the Whaling Station, part of the Monterey State Historic Park as well. And then Jack Swan, who operated California's first theater. Well, not him, but the New York Volunteers, but he owned that property, took off, and only one returned, and that was Jack Swan. So there was a kind of an abandonment of the town for people who were rushing for the gold rush. Larkin, meantime, did send letters of success about the gold rush, the land around it, the wealth that was going to come, another economic boom. And I inserted this because this has the original nugget The speck of the future that Marshall found in the tail race was sent to Washington in 1848 and has been preserved at the Smithsonian Institution. Did not know that. Um, But for the impact on the gold rush on Larkin, of course, many of his employees quit and took off, just dropped their tools and their job and took off. Larkin, in making the best of the situation, provided them with the tools and supplies and was a silent partner. The Boston store has a connection to this because Larkin actually built the Boston store. First, it was used as a hospital for the seamen, and then it became a quarters for the Army under the command of Lieutenant Tecumseh Sherman. And finally, it was a Boston store where you could get goods and supplies for mining. There was even a safe, there still is, where they kept the gold dust. The miners would come into town and keep the gold dust in their safe. That's why it got its name, Casa del Oro, as well. It's now known as Casa del Oro, as well as the Boston store. So when Mexico ruled before, Larkin could not own land. He had to be a citizen, and he never gave up his American citizenship. But he did get his naturalization decreed, and also land grants through his children. So real estate was his special domain, and is also he here in 1847 he paid $2,800 for a rancho of 22,185 acres along the Feather River. This land straddled undiscovered gold fields. The land would later merit an asking price of $1 million. His speculative spirit promoted a new town called Benicia, and it was almost a partnership that he let Semple take over eventually because he had more interest in San Francisco. So by the time of the gold rush, Larkin had permanently settled in San Francisco in time for that economic boom. Okay. So here, as far as lasting legacy, Larkin was thought to be, by some, to be the richest man in America. Then on October 27th, 1858, while at his ranch in Colusa, California, he contracted typhoid fever. He was testing the waters, and that may have caused it. And he died within a week. He was 56 years old. So on the left is a photo of commercial solidarity. Larkin is in the middle. And these were the 5 merchant princes who came to own a large chunk of California. So, yeah, okay. Now, so lasting legacy. First, the Larkin House. The Larkin House in Monterey was already designated as a state historical landmark in 1933, but through the efforts of the granddaughter, Alice Larkin Tolman, was also a national historic landmark in 1956. It was also the prototype of what was coined in 1929 as an architectural style called Monterey Colonial. And the Monterey Colonial was a combination of New England architecture with Mexican California building materials, such as adobe and lumber. The features and main features of that would be a central doorway, followed by a central staircase, surrounding veranda, and a wood shingle roof. And you can see the influence of the Monterey Colonial in our historical buildings right now. Actually, you have 4 buildings that display some of these features: the Pacific House, the Custom House, the Whaling Station, and of course the Larkin. So, so all of this took place in Monterey, but one thing in San Francisco, there was even a new species of fish named in his honor, G. larsinski. And I want to thank Stuart for pointing that out. And of the 12 influential businessmen from Massachusetts, only Larkin and Stern were elected to serve in the Constitutional Convention. And by the way, if you ever visit the Larkin house upstairs, there is a bedroom called the Vallejo room, because Mariano Vallejo, General Vallejo, and Larkin were good friends and also interrelated with family, because Mariano Vallejo's sister was married to John Rogers Cooper. So figure that out. Anyway, so they would, Vallejo would stay over at the Larkin house, and they would walk across the street to Colton Hall to attend the convention. His greatest impact was being the first and last American consul. That is also a very unique distinction. And many historians and some historians have claimed that, for instance, Joshua Royce, a philosopher historian, said that Larkin was foremost among the men who won for us California. Now, not just the achievements and actions, but his character was succinctly noted by Rainier Wilkinson Kelsey, and it's not in the slide, but I'm going to read it. Rainier Wilkinson Kelsey said, "It may be said that in his attitude towards the acquisition, Larkin displayed a persistent desire for friendliness and fair play towards the Californians. From first to last, he was mindful of their rights and responsibilities. He should be held by Americans as representing their best conception of fair play towards the inhabitants of California and by the descendants of the old Californians of Spanish blood. He should be remembered as the most constant friend of their people." And that is the end. So I think we have time for questions or comments. I just wanted to add that there's been lectures about Jack Swan, who built California's first theater, and also of David Jacks, who was a businessman. And I thought, well, how come no one's given one on Thomas Larkin? He's done a lot for this place. And so that's my motivation for this lecture. This is the Larkin house that you see there, the front, the plaque that denotes the historical landmark, and the garden. If you go into the garden, there used to be a bowling alley there when Larkin built it, and because his property extended to about 4 buildings, including up to the 4 Winds. So he owned quite a bit there. And then there used to be a boarding house right there where there's a plaque where Robert Louis Stevenson stayed for a while. And he was asked to leave because he was coughing too much, disturbing the others. And that's it. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, okay. Well, first of all, when I retired after 39 years, I wanted to do something else. And I had worked for state parks before I was a teacher, just a year. And I was given the assignment, actually, to do a house tour for Larkin House in Cooper Malera, because they were half brothers. And so I learned about Larkin, but I knew nothing to start. I didn't even know the building existed. There were also a couple of other buildings that belonged to Monterey State Historic Park over by Heritage Plaza that I didn't know existed. So I'm a history buff, and this man was fascinating as far as, doing research and just, there's so much. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Hi. That's a good question. No, and of the 10 children at the time that photograph was taken in 1858, 5 out of 10 grew to adulthood. But the granddaughter died in 19, well, Stuart, help me out. Alice, yeah, the granddaughter died in Santa Barbara. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but that's the only one that I can, find out or found out. Yes. Oh, yeah, Yes, yes. In fact, his roommate was Lieutenant Halleck. And this is kind of funny and coincidental, but I went to Seaside High, and one of our cafeteria is named Halleck. And in Fort Ord, or close enough, most of the name of the forts are named after generals. And Sherman did become a general. You know what he did to Atlanta. But he was also using the office at the custom house. He was a quartermaster or something, besides having that lead in at the Boston store. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, yes, that's true. Yeah. She was to meet her husband at the time she got involved with Larkin. Rachel would have been also, I forgot to add, would have been the first American woman to go around the Cape and settle in America, California. First one. Mhm. Okay. Yes. Oh, no, no, it was their child. Because what happened was Alice Tolman had it investigated because she said she heard a rumor and she had it confirmed by investigating and going back to where she was born. She died in infancy, and so no one ever mentioned it. Yeah.